Good evening, welcome. My name is Britt Salvesen. I'm the department head and curator of photography here at LACMA. I'm joined by Anthony Lepore, a photographic artist whose work is represented in LACMA's collection. And we're coming to you live, so pardon any rough spots, from the galleries at LACMA, and specifically the exhibition Acting Out, Cabinet Cards in the Making of Modern Photography, 1870 to 1900. This show comes to LACMA from the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, so we thank the team and the curators there for providing us with this beautiful glimpse into a really interesting point in photographic history and American history, this transition point between the very first kind of uncomfortable, stiff photographs of the mid-19th century to the brink of the snapshot era when people could make their own photographs. So this is a period of time when people were more comfortable with photography and when entrepreneurs could set up photography businesses, but they weren't able yet to make their own photographs at home. So it was still a process of going into a studio, having an interaction with a professional photographer and documenting your life in that medium. Cabinet card refers specifically to a format of photography, the size basically, and I have one here so you can kind of see how it looks in my hand. It's about 4 inches by 6 inches, and this was a kind of a branding, if you will, a way to encourage people to get more photographs made. You could also fit a lot more in terms of props, multiple people. You could do a little bit more in a frame of this size than the previous standard size, which was quite a bit smaller. It's kind of like when we went from the smaller iPhone to a large-scale screen. It was in part salesmanship, but it also opened up aesthetic opportunities. This show features photographs made in small towns and larger cities throughout the country, but it's a bit lacking in images from the California area. So this is in large part why I wanted to invite Anthony to talk about his discovery and thinking and research into an archive of glass plate negatives that were made in San Luis Obispo, California, and now housed in Paso Robles, California. And these pictures have just, for both of us, unearthed so many interesting questions and kind of pictorial satisfactions. And we feel like the story, though we'll be telling you what we know to this date, but we hope that the story will continue. So, Anthony, if you don't mind picking up the introduction of R.J. Arnold, the photographer we'll be talking about, and we'll be showing you some slides of his works.
I first came upon R.J. Arnold's glass plate negatives on a late Thanksgiving night, almost 10 years ago. I was visiting my aunt, who is the president of the Historical Society in Paso Robles, and she'd asked me if I could come down and look at these glass plates. I was so excited to see them that with a belly still full of Thanksgiving, on Thanksgiving night, I went down to the Historical Society and down to the basement with my partner Michael, and took a flashlight and pulled one of these glass plate negatives out of the box. And what I saw was an amazing portrait of a Latina child, a stunning portrait. I had a really strong feeling that there was something special here. There was a ton of glass plates. I didn't know how many at the time.
And you didn't even know who made them at the time, did you?
Had no information. It didn't come with a single print. It didn't come with the name of the photographer. There were some names scrolled across the top of the glass plates, but nothing that referenced the photographer. We didn't even know if he was really from the area. So flash forward kind of a year later, and an archivist from the Catholic Church that someone in the Historical Society knew came. His name is Dr. Scabani, I think. Sorry if I got that wrong. And he came and trained the volunteers at the Historical Society to clean the glass plates. I started coming up and scanning them and making prints and helping with the archive, and I was just blown away. After maybe looking at 100 slides, I realized in terms of diversity, we had something really special. By the time we were done, we found that we had one of the largest collections of Latino portraiture pre-1900 in all of California, if not even on a larger scale. The portraits were stunning. They were technically strong. There was empathy in the way that he was getting the subjects to look back at him. But more than anything, what makes them historically important is the diversity. There was the Latino community he was focusing on. He was photographing Chinese workers that were there to build the railroads, and there's a significant amount of Chinese portraits. He was photographing indigenous coastal communities, and it's just really an incredible collection.
Great, well, let's look at some of the pictures.
Absolutely. So Arnold was born in England. He photographed immigrants in San Luis Obispo. He was an immigrant himself. He probably was in America for about 10 years before he moved out west. I created a sort of mask for this picture because I wanted to see that if you went into a studio, this is probably what you would get. It would be an oval or a half oval that cropped out about a third to 2/3 of the picture, depending on which format negative he was shooting. And what's so great about having the whole negatives is we can print them now and we can see the whole studio practice. There's several pictures of moms trying to coax a smile or an expression out of a child. We get to see the studio practice. We get to see the props, the edges of the sets, the frayed carpets that people were standing on. We're going to look at about 8 slides now to really show the diversity of his subjects. Oops, sorry about that.
And here's one where you see a fairly elaborately painted backdrop,
Yeah.
and a prop that would come and go through different photographs, I assume.
Yep, and there's a door on this one, but in other pictures we see the same painted backdrop and the door is removed and people are standing farther back into the scene. He repeatedly uses this carpet that sort of looks like a natural grass thing that becomes rattier as it goes on. I love this portrait. There's some beautiful dried flowers in this gentleman's jacket. And I'm not quite sure why there are 2, but these are smaller sized portraits and they're both printed on one of the negatives. The negatives are about 4 by 8 inches. In this portrait of a Latino family, we start to see hints of how he was lighting the pictures. If you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the shadows of the ceiling where part of it has been removed to let sunlight in, a skylight essentially. And here we're just seeing this shadow. It almost looks like a kind of painting on top of the painted backdrop.
He would have been using natural light almost all the time,
Yeah.
probably. And photography studios would be located on top floors,
Yeah.
to let that light in.
And it seems that he would have a cloth on super sunny days to sort of soften the shadows that would happen when the light would fall on people. And then he would remove that when it's a cloudy day and you could get a sort of even, almost softbox exposure. I really love this portrait. I really like her scale in the studio. He's pulled the camera back farther than he normally does here.
Here you're seeing some evidence of missing parts, or, the limits of restoration, I suppose.
Absolutely. We looked forever for the bottom shard of this glass plate negative and we could never find it. Her face is amazing. And you also can see in the upper right-hand corner the emotion on the back starting to peel. And sometimes it actually almost becomes part of the photo as it exists for us now and becomes part of the subject.
Yeah.
So now we're going to watch a short video that we shot at the Historical Society. And then I wanted to show you some of the glass plates. So we'll take the video, we'll look at the video to see some of the glass plates and how we were working with them.
Welcome to the Paso Robles Carnegie Library. This is the home of the El Paso de Robles Area Historical Society, and the Paso Robles History Museum.
This is my Aunt Grace Pucci, and this is Karen McLaurin. And they have both been working on R.J. Arnold's archive for many years now. I wanted to ask them a couple questions about the restoration process and the exhibitions that we've all put on together. How did you feel about R.J. Arnold's archive when you first received it compared to after it was cataloged and cleaned and exhibited?
Well, when they first came in, we weren't really sure what we had. The plates were, some of them were damaged, some of them were dirty, and so we put them in the storage room and they sat there for a while. Once we had the plates out and we started cleaning them and we started scanning them, we saw how incredibly beautiful they were and how they were so representative of life in this area at that period of time. So I think they're magnificent and we're thrilled to have them.
Did you want to add anything, Karen?
Sure. Should I start with Brother Scrivani?
Yeah, mention Brother Scrivani because
Okay.
he was a big part of the restoration process.
He was. So, we were very fortunate. Brother Scrivani, who is a Marianist and was also the archivist at the Cooper Malaria Adobe in, it's Malaria, not malaria. Okay, can I try again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We were very fortunate that by chance, Brother Scrivani was in the Historical Society doing research and saw the glass plates. Immediately, our president, Grace Pucci, spoke to him and found out he was a Marianist and the archivist at the Cooper Malaria Adobe in Monterey. She immediately asked if he would like to come and show us how to clean and catalog glass plates. And I was very excited and fortunate to be part of this project and see the Richard J. Arnold photos.
Great. Can you describe a little bit about the cleaning and restoration process?
Certainly, we had to clean and catalog the glass plates. This particular, I would have, we would start, we would put our gloves on. We organized a bowl of water with just a couple of drops of ivory liquid. That was what Father Scrivani recommended. We'd stir it up. We would place the glass plate down. Right now I've got it on a piece of paper towel, and you put it emulsion down. People had to delicately take it out of old envelopes. They were in very bad shape. This particular glass plate is also you can tell the glass side because it's the shiny side, but you never wanted to touch the emulsion side. And then we would gently sort of try to clean the glass. Sometimes we just used Q-tips. And then the cataloging, we had a cataloging sheet with all the fields that we wanted to have, describing it. We would then, once it was clean, put it into an acid-free envelope and into acid-free boxes. We started the project in 2012 and we finished it including putting the catalog sheets into Excel for the moment in 2014, and then the scanning of all these glass plates occurred in 2015. So it was quite a long project.
And the scanning was as comprehensive, or it took as long often as the restoration. We got a similar scanner that I had used to make the initial prints, and we created a beautiful high-res archive of the entire collection of 1,500 glass plate negatives.
Mm-hmm. And it was from those scans that we produced the beautiful photographs that we have now.
I'm going to ask you one more question. Was there anything about these photos that changed the way you thought about the history of the Central Coast or about photography in general?
Grace, you go, I've talked enough.
No. I think what it showed us, once the photos were printed and exhibited, what it showed us was the great diversity that existed in this area in the late 1800s. And the thing that really impressed us most was the subjects that he chose. They weren't just people sitting in a studio with a lot of money who were there just to pose for a print. They were there, he shot people from all walks of life. So not only do we see the very wealthy that were in this area, we see the great diversity of people who were here. And what struck me most was the great dignity that these people evinced in the photographs once they were developed.
And like Grace, I was very excited because it appears Richard J. Arnold was very egalitarian. He took photos, as Grace said, of people from all walks of life. We saw some people wearing the similar costumes, as well as having backdrops, which were very interesting. He had some costumes, and people would put those on. We'd see the same top on a woman, but they were beautiful. Just the people were beautiful, and what a talented photographer.
And the other thing that was amazing when the scans were done and the prints were created was to see the detail in the costumes, because the laces were beautiful, the jewelry the women wore. It was just wonderful to see that, and it came out so clearly in the photographs, especially since those glass plates were made in the late 1800s, and to be looking at them now in the 21st century and to see the clarity is remarkable.
Hi, we're in the archive of the Historical Society, and I wanted to share some of R.J. Arnold's glass plate negatives with you. When the negatives first entered the collection, many of them were damaged. They had been stored in a barn on the Central Coast, and some of them were covered with mud, and there was much moisture damage that caused the paper sleeves they were in to stick together. Here's an example of an unclean negative that was proven too damaged to print. You can see the paper negative is attached to it. We can see a little bit of the emulsion through the paper. The negatives that weren't too damaged to print came in a sleeve like this, some of them with a name of the subject written on them. When they arrived, we had very little information about the subjects. We didn't know the artist's name. There were no prints or texts or inventories associated with them. Here's an example of a negative that has been damaged, but part of the image remained. We have some insect damage in the middle of the print here. I'm going to lift that up to show it to you. Part of the emulsion has been eaten away. I think some of this damage is really beautiful, especially when it's printed. And this one almost looks like she's being engulfed in a cloud. So here's an example of one that has damage, but has been cleaned. The next negative we're going to look at is of the picnic picture that we'll see in the slideshow. This has been completely cleaned. It has little damage. This is an absolutely beautiful scene of a Latino family out in the hills around San Luis Obispo or Paso Robles. I want to talk to you about how he made his prints. When you received a print from him, it was very small. The enlarger had not been developed yet, and so they were all contact prints. I'm going to sort of take you through how he would make a contact print. We'll have to use our imagination, because this would be done in the dark. And we'll imagine that this is a piece of photosensitive paper. He would lay the paper down in a dark room and then place the negative on top of it. He would then expose it to light and process the exposed paper in chemistry. Here we have an example of a print made in the same way that R.J. Arnold would have printed them. We see the whole edge of the negative and the image. I'll bring this up so you can see it a little closer. This isn't how you would receive a print from him if you went to his portrait studio and had your portrait taken. I'm going to switch to another portrait to explain. Here's another contact print that I made from one of the negatives. If you'll notice here at the top, he's scratched or drawn into the emotion the name of the subject. This was really fantastic as we started to curate this collection, because we were able to tell family names and connect them through local histories and family names. So when we first opened the exhibition, many of the people coming in, or several of the people coming in, were able to see their relatives in these portraits. So this is how I printed it using the full negative. One of the things that I really love is that we get to see the whole photographic process in terms of his studio. We see the painted backdrop. We see this piece of carpet here that sort of mimics grass, and this plaster prop to the left. When you actually would receive a picture from him, it would be in the form of a cabinet card, and it would look something like this. Unfortunately, I don't have a cabinet card of this other picture, but you get the idea. He's cropping out all the edges and much of the props in the pictures. And what I love about having the actual glass plates to print and to look at is we really get to understand how he made pictures, what the interior studio looked like, and later on how he lit them. I wanted to show you a couple pictures that I think sort of deal with aging and death and time. I kind of believe that photography was invented, or people sort of longed for it, because they were afraid of the passage of time. They wanted to hold on to a moment. They were afraid of getting old, and they were certainly afraid of dying. And photography enabled us to sort of cling to these moments, to stop time and fix it on a piece of paper. This picture that we're looking at here is one of my favorites in the whole collection. There are about 7 examples of these double portraits, and they show R.J. Arnold's amazing retouching skills. So essentially, this picture was made. The left one, the slide would have been put in the camera and shot, would have been taken out, and the other side would have been shot. They both would have looked like the portrait on the right, and then the one on the left is retouched. I find it so haunting. It's like she's aging right in front of us. At first, I thought it was a mother and a daughter, but then you start to look close and you see that the outfits and everything are exactly the same. I wasn't quite sure how he was accomplishing this, but as we were cleaning the negatives, we started to see these kind of scratch marks on the backs of people's faces on the emotion side of the negative. And we found out that these were retouching marks. I think he was using these double portraits as a way to sell this as a service for an added fee, where you could sort of wipe away time off of your face when you made a portrait. Who doesn't want that? It's pre-Photoshop, and I think he was a master at it. Even zooming in close on these files, it's hard to see his hand in them, but it is really easy to see it on the back side of the negative. And so I have a picture that I'm going to show you next. Oops, sorry. Right here. Now this is the back side of the emotion side of that same picture we were just looking at. And this is the retouched side. And you can see all of the lines sort of etched in. He's using something called a leaded pencil, and he moistens the back of the emotion and then draws over it. And it sort of fills in and erases the lines of time. This picture really reminds me of Dorian Gray in the fact that when you look at the back of the negatives, everyone looks sort of monstrous, like these lines have been carved into their face.
This was really exciting for me to see too, because the literature of the time refers to retouching constantly. I mean, it was a very, very common practice, and as you just said, part of the service that was offered, and there were kind of preferences and tastes for how far to go. Yeah. And I didn't fully understand what a delicate art it was until seeing this evidence on this negative.
Yeah, and I've seen some, not in R.J. Arnold's collection, that are just like over the top. There's another portrait by another artist at the historical site, and it almost just looks like the face has been washed away and it's a cartoon.
In some of the commentary, those examples were kind of disdained as being making people look like eggshells or potatoes.
Yes, exactly.
So you could go too far.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back and just look at the left portrait, and you can see that that's the one that had all those drawn marks on it. This is another one of these double portraits. This one's more subtle, but the sort of contours of the face are changed. I really love the deterioration on this negative. It looks like it's snowing behind her. This is not one of the double portraits, but this is one that has been heavily retouched. And I find this picture to be so strange and wonderful. It's like she's two ages at the same time. She seems older and younger. I also love the sort of like almost snake teeth of her collar. So we can't have a look at 19th century photography without looking at a couple dead babies. And I apologize. But I kind of want to recontextualize this because they seem so creepy and morbid to us now. But try to imagine that you had a young child. There was so much infant death at the time, and your child was taken from you, and you never had a single photograph. You don't want to rely just on your memory to remember them. And something that Britt and I had talked about was that death was more of a domestic thing in this time. It was in the home. People weren't ushered away to die in hospitals. They often passed in their houses. And so photographers would come to people's homes and make a portrait, often when the child hadn't been photographed before. It also points to the growing importance of photography and of portraiture at the time, where people saw a real value in being able to have a picture of someone. This child here is one of the more natural ones. Sometimes they're just in a coffin. Here she's laid with flowers. She's dressed in a dress, and it's made to look as natural as possible. This one a little less so. I can't imagine if I had lost a child and I didn't have a photo of them that I wouldn't want one. And the last part of this sort of darker suite of images is some mourning portraits. I wasn't at all familiar with what a mourning portrait was, but I think it's kind of badass. I feel like with sadness now, we hide it away, we smile all the time, and back then, people wore clothes that showed they were in mourning, and they had their photograph taken. And I think that, I think there's something beautiful. R.J. Arnold is witnessing this woman's loss and her suffering. And even the dog looks incredibly sad. This is another mourning portrait, and her expression is so intense. I find it so moving. You can literally feel the smack of grief on her face. Now we're just going to move on to some other portraits. I first thought this was a wedding portrait because it was a white dress, but do you want to say something about?
Yeah, this actually, the more we looked at it, the more questions we had in a way, because while white dresses were starting to be an option for weddings in this period, it was by no means a given, and the dress could be very, very dark, in fact, and as is the example that we have in our galleries when you come to see the show. Also, this backdrop doesn't seem to suggest necessarily that kind of occasion, and we don't have another person.
Yeah,
though
exactly.
Sometimes there would be pairs of images. So
it's an absent groom.
Yeah, exactly. And we wonder then, is this a young novitiate or
a quinceañera or
right.
coming of age sort of celebration.
Some other kind of individual milestone. We're just not sure, but I think things like closer analysis of the garments and the veil and so on, through experts could reveal some information.
Yeah. I have to say, one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here and to show this work is that we have so little answers about it. And the more it's shown, the more information we get and the more we learn about R.J. Arnold's pictures. I really love the window on the backdrop. I feel like the light is especially realistic as it's coming through and appears to be hitting this white dress. There's a lot of lace in this picture.
These pairs of kind of courting scenes are quite common in the exhibition as well. So it was really fun to see one pop up in this archive, and it picks up on existing themes of Victorian illustration, book illustration, Valentine's cards, etc. But it's also always fun to kind of see images within images. You know, so maybe they're looking at a photograph, possibly a letter or some other kind of printed matter, but it's fun to see the kind of the material culture of pictures in action.
It also is like, you know, there was stage photography before this, but this also leads into contemporary stage photography. There's very few pictures in all of Arnold's collection that we have that are staged in this way, or that something is being acted out. There's one other ballerina picture, but most of them are really sort of, you know, more traditional, sort of standing and looking at the camera. And that makes me think of later photographers like August Sonder, and even contemporary photographers like Judith Joy Ross. And I really like connecting him to that lineage of really, of portraiture. I also love this picture. You realize I love a lot of these pictures. This girl is amazing. I feel like she owns the town. She is smart. I feel like there's something about R.J. Arnold where he can sort of see the adult in children. Often the children look or act like adults. I think she's remarkable. This is a little bit different in terms of the backdrop. The backdrop is much smaller. It's not a vertical, which most of the portraits are. It's a horizontal. And I think he probably would have only selected a kind of oval right in the center. But I love all the empty space and getting to see the studio and the sort of out of focus props. This is three sisters. We think that the two outer sisters are twins. Here's an example of, he was photographing people from all different economical backgrounds, or economic backgrounds. And he has repeated outfits that people could wear if they didn't have a dress or something to put on. And these are some of the outfits that we've seen repeated throughout the body of work. I think it's such a great portrait. And I love the three cracks that sort of mimic the three sisters. This is an example of where a crack to me adds something to the picture.
Through many of these examples, including this one, we've just been seeing some really kind of beautiful human gestures and body language. Certainly people were encouraged to pose in certain ways, but one's natural stance and gesture tends to come through.
Yeah.
And here, you're thinking these are perhaps brothers.
Yeah, I was so excited. I thought it was a gay couple when I first saw it. I was like, yes, we have a gay couple in R.J. Arnold's world. But I think that they're brothers on a closer examination. And I think that the one on the right is possibly blind. When you zoom in on the scan, he has some issues with his eyes. And I find it so moving, the idea. Diane Arbus photographed a blind couple, and that's one of my favorite portraits of hers. But the idea of like standing there and exposing yourself in front of a camera that's looking at you and you not being able to look back, I think is so moving. And if it is his brother, reaching out to comfort him and to hold his hand, it's such a beautiful gesture of masculinity that we don't often see. And they're in front of like a Disney backdrop. I can almost hear like a little bird, little blue jay singing. There are only 2 close-up portraits like this in all of the plates. I don't know, did we say how many there are? There was 2,000 plates, and there are 1,500 that are printable. 500 were damaged or stuck together or broken. And out of all of those, there are only 2. And we think that they they could be related. I don't think the other slide is in here, but this picture is amazing because it's the only inkling we have of Arnold. And when you zoom into her eyes, when you do a high-res scan, which is kind of amazing because you could never see this in his day. You zoom in and scan into the scan, you can see his silhouette under a dark cloth reflecting in her eyes. The shadowy artist. I don't know if he liked dogs, but he certainly let them into his studio. And there's some great dog pictures. Dogs on fake rocks. I don't know if you can tell here, but it's a really sweet moment where the boy is grabbing on and holding onto the dog's leg. This is the only picture with a dog alone. And this and the morning portrait are probably my favorite of the dog pictures. I think the expressions are remarkably similar, really open and beautiful on both the dog and the boy. This guy looks like he could be in Silver Lake right now, or Brooklyn. And while most of the pictures have painted backdrops, there are quite a few that just have. They almost feel a little bit more contemporary when there's not a painted backdrop.
It was a bit of a fashion change during this period from the elaborate painted backdrops and props to a more pared down minimalist style, and again changing tastes is part of that, and also perhaps to have it look more modern.
Yeah,
and
it does.
and maybe to encourage people to come back and have a new style portrait
Yeah,
made.
exactly. I mean, it's interesting, we talked about this too, that there's not a lot of examples of repeat customers here. There really is very few portraits of people coming back over time.
And that's very interesting in terms of what I've learned about kind of the business cycles of these studios, and it might explain why he left and continued north in California to Santa Barbara and Monterey, ultimately, looking for bigger clientele or clientele who could afford to come back time and again.
And Monterey was more of a tourist destination than San Luis Obispo was at that time.
Yeah.
We found several pictures where he was rephotographing photography, which is like so popular in contemporary photography that I thought I should throw this in. This was a way that he could make copies of pictures. So this may not actually be his photograph. Someone may have hired him to photograph a print that they had so that they could make more prints of it.
Yeah, that was a very common practice. That's how you got copies.
Yeah. Here we have an example of something, we may have seen it already, but it's pretty clear in this picture. There's a light leak. Some light came in onto the negative, and it looks like almost like an alien beam is going to beam him up, or his shoulder. And it's a gray line there. And he has I think he probably had a negative holder or something, some part of his camera, because it's almost always in the same spot on the negatives. And I know, as being a photographer, like I had a camera, my 4x5 had a thing that was like slightly out of focus on one part of the camera, and it just repeats and repeats until you catch it.
Looks like he's just barely catching those kids before they run out.
I know, they're about to bolt. The similarity is really remarkable on all three of the children and the mother. And I like this one because we're seeing this big white board to the right that is using to bounce light and to sort of eliminate the shadows that would have been on the left-hand side of the picture.
We saw a picture in the very first group of slides of a Chinese man in a Western style suit. I think you have some examples, including this one, where it appears to be more traditional clothing, and I think we both became really intrigued about that community,
Yeah.
knowing that in a general sense that laborers came here to work on the railroad, but not yet quite sure how this all fit together. But you were saying you've put together a couple more pieces of
A
puzzle.
little bit. I was always interested in the portraits of the Chinese men. First of all, it was almost exclusively men, and they were in traditional Chinese dress, often with objects like things from the tea ceremony. We did a little bit of research, and I didn't know exactly. The railroad was finished in 1970, and they built the 1870, sorry. The Chinese community built the Cuesta Grade, which is the huge line that's cut through the mountain that comes up to San Luis Obispo, which now is what 101 is on. And when that was finished, many of them settled and started a Chinatown in San Luis Obispo, which was actually a block or two away from where Arnold's studio was. I just found that out today. And I think so they really were maintaining their culture within a Western experience, and Arnold was photographing that. This is like the impossible breadbasket. I love this picture. This guy's amazing. And the way he's holding the basket, I think that someone else might be holding it on the side or something, but it just seems kind of impossible.
And it was a ranching area.
Yeah.
So it wasn't totally a surprise to see this occupational portrait of butchers. And we've got some related things in the exhibition. But didn't you say there's a sort of interesting feature in the carcasses?
Yeah, there's like flowers and herbs that are sort of embedded into the animals. I apologize for the vegans that are watching this, but it's a kind of remarkable portrait, and it's the humans and the meat all displayed sort of on equal level.
And it's not so many examples where he's clearly taken the camera to another site, right?
No, I'd probably say it's probably 30 out of all those that he's leaving. He's really good outside, though. I wish he would have made more pictures outside because they're quite remarkable. And so we have this. Ranching was a big thing. There's, it's cowboys and Victorian culture that are really getting mashed up here. And you see that throughout the body of work. This is an amazing display of produce and grapes. This was taken at what would later become the Mid-State Fair, which is one of the longest running state fairs in California. It's an agricultural area. Many of the immigrants that moved to the Central Coast and the Central Valley were working on farms and ranches. This picture is pretty amazing in the sense that it had some really smart or intuitive bugs that ate it. And it's hard to see on the slide, but on the left-hand side, there's some insects that have eaten the emulsion, and they've eaten it almost in the perfect shapes of a grape. And so it sort of blends into the rest of the picture.
We've spent a lot of time talking and thinking about this picture, and you glimpsed the negative earlier when Anthony showed it in the video. One thing that I noticed, and I put the question to Anthony since he is a photographer who has made portraits, is that some individuals in this group are clearly looking at Arnold's camera, at the lens. They're kind of facing head on, but several are looking out of frame. So I initially speculated, well, I wonder if there was another camera set up over there, but that in reflection doesn't seem to be the most likely situation. What are your thoughts?
Well, I feel like photographers are such solitary characters that he's probably not going to have someone, unless it was a wedding maybe. But I think when I've made group portraits, it often feels stiff and sort of boring if everyone is looking at the camera. So I often would have someone stand off to the side, or just have people look off at the landscape, or to pick a different place to look. This is something that Nick Nixon, the photographer, does really well in his porch portraits that he did, where every single person is sort of engaged. And what it makes us think about is the world outside of the frame and what's behind the camera. And it sort of makes the world seem bigger than it is in the picture. And so I think that's something. Also something that I noticed is that all of the women have hats on, and there's an extra hat in the lower right-hand corner. So perhaps there's someone that's, you know,
Late to the party.
yeah, or let their hat go and is standing off to the side. So yeah, I think it's such an amazing portrait. There's such great detail. This is one that really gives an argument for blowing these pictures up into a larger size. There's the most amazing giant jam jar in the middle. The guy in the center is all tough and holding a shotgun. There's a younger boy on the right-hand side with a dog behind him who has a great grin. The woman's smile on the left-hand side in the middle is remarkable. Yeah, it really captures the landscape and a family. This, we think, is a stereographic image, and Britt used a viewer to look at it, and it looked a little 3D.
You do get a recession of depth that works. However, what's happening here, it remains mysterious.
We don't know what's going on. It could be a rural wedding. I love the adobe on the left, and then there's this sort of natural woven structure on the right. There's a woman in a veil. I don't know what's going on, but it's one of the few that is outside, and I would love to know more about it. This is a picture made probably just south of San Luis Obispo. It's of the coast. Here we have that light leak again. It looks like it could be like a really specific fog bank that's coming in, but it's that same light leak. There are parts of the coast that look like this today. This road now has become Highway 1 between San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay, and the mountain on the left is one of the Morros that lead up to Morro Rock. I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I think it's really interesting that California at this time really represents the coming together of Victorian culture coming from the East in England and cowboy culture, which is a sort of Western phenomenon. And so we're getting these mixes happening in the costumes and in the way that people are posing and holding themselves in these pictures. Keep that in mind, because I want to point out one other thing, and that's the lighting above. Here we can really see the skylight with the sunlight pouring in to illuminate it, and we're seeing this sort of curtain that could mediate the light. Natural light is so beautiful, and it looks so great on large format glass plate negatives. So here, these are brothers. They look like they're cowboys. The posture is different. The clothing is not Victorian. And here we have also a not as bright, but a showing of the ceiling where the light is coming through.
Anthony, while we still have the picnic picture in our minds,
Yeah.
I see a question that came in about do we know the specific location? That tree looks like, if it still exists, it could potentially be
I know,
identifiable.
of the picnic picture.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because it looks, I think it's a sycamore tree, and it looks so much like, it's not the oaks, but Paso Robles means pass of the oaks, yeah. And it looks so much like that. I don't know the location. The other picture I know because of that mountain, and I've driven by it so much, but it's somewhere it's outside of Paso Robles, or outside of San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, but these specific sites, that's another avenue of research,
Yeah.
really.
If you've seen that tree, please
Yes.
contact us.
Yes.
We have a couple examples of side lighting that I think he does really beautifully. I'm not quite sure how he's doing this, if it's exposed to the outside. There's some sort of, it's a sort of screen, but I think that these are really beautifully illuminated. I really love this one. I love this woman's outfit, and the lace, or I don't know if it's lace, but the sort of lines that come down the shirt are really beautiful. This is another one of Chinese portraits. And here you can see he's holding a book and a fan. I really want to do more research because you can go, there are still 2 or 3 businesses that are open that are in the same buildings. And one of them that has been run by the same Chinese family since this period.
And you were mentioning you read about some kind of discoveries of artifacts even in and around where buildings no longer exist.
It's so depressing. They built a parking lot for Ross Dress for Less, and there was like ancient cultural items there that were obviously brought from China, and then when part of Chinatown was demolished, they were buried. He almost looks like he's levitating to me in this picture because the bench is hidden by his legs. This kid makes me laugh. It looks like that she's going to fall over. I have a feeling that in some of the pictures you can see a kind of prop that would hold up a child's neck or keep them from falling, and I assume that that's there. I think this one is really different because the composition is so different, and you really see these layers of, not props, but of the backdrop sort of one on top of the other. This is the same backdrop that we saw before, but there was a door in the space where the mother is now standing.
Well, speaking of the point you were hinting at of using the same backdrop again and again, there's a question I can see that's popping up about did you find kind of failed takes or what we might now call bracketing? You know, I mean, you showed some side-by-side double examples, and I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, given the value of glass plates and so on, would he have made a few attempts, or did you kind of work with what you got with one exposure or perhaps 2?
I didn't find any sort of in-between pictures. I don't know if you could recycle them.
I think you could clean the emulsion off
Yeah,
and use them again.
I think that might be what happened because there really wasn't. There are some that have a little blur in them, but they're good pictures too. I don't think he made another one and then just saved that one.
Okay.
It's a good question. It's not the way that most people work now, especially digitally. Like we shoot and shoot and shoot, and we have so many.
It's true. Roll film and then digital changed all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And also the glass plates, it's remarkable because it's 2,000 glass plates and it's all singular images. It's not repeats. And so it's almost kind of more work than if it was a contemporary portrait photographer. I love this guy too. This reminds me of the Blue Boy painting at the Huntington. It says like, I own this town. It's such a funny and awesome picture. His hand gesture is great. These are 2 sisters. These are also repeated outfits that we see throughout the collection.
And the arm holding that corn stalk.
It's so great. And it references the agriculture that's happening in the area. Yeah. There's a dried corn blossom that's falling off of it. I really love this picture. The first show that we curated at the Historical Society, this was the image we used for the poster.
Anthony, how long do you think the exposure times were with natural light?
It's a good question. There's not a lot of blur, so I feel like a second at the most.
Yeah. Plates were getting fast.
Yeah. What do you think?
Mass produced. I agree. I think it's no more than a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Sometimes less because he would get a lot of good light here.
And he'd bring in so much light.
Yeah.
It's interesting too because if you go Morro Bay, where the plates are, is pretty much sunny all the time. San Luis Obispo is half sunny, half clouds, and then Morro Bay is cloudy. And it's sort of this line that it looks like from the outside pictures that he was traveling. And I think he would wait for that sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a few baby pictures. I really like this one. This one has had quite a lot of damage. It's also a different size. I'd say there was probably 30 or 40 5x7-inch negatives, and this was one of those, and he often would shoot those horizontally. Now, like the cracks almost become part of the architecture of the picture. I love this one. This is like a S&M lesson at Disneyland. The background is so, this is so Disney. This is also awesome. That outfit is so wild. And
You've shown these to your students, right?
yeah, a ton.
Uh-huh.
And it's been part of every class. It's so amazing to get to bring the representation in these pictures to my students. It's such a great response. In this picture, if you look just above her head to the right, you can see the emotion painted on to the negative. I love this picture. This is Cordelia. We don't know her last name, but her name is, her first name and last initial are scrolled on the side, and I think it's a stunning picture. This is one of the few with blurs. We have one more. Do we have time for one more picture?
We do have time for one more, and we have a question coming in about the numbers that are written, and we can only assume those are an inventory.
Some
We've
sort of
lost
catalog.
the ledger book that they may have gone with, but studio photographers would typically keep the negatives and number them so that if that sitter or their family came back and wanted more prints, they would be able to pull that negative out
Yeah.
and make more. If only we would find, or could, if the written record existed,
I
we'd
know.
probably know more, but that's what those come from. There's not a full sequence, I
No.
assume, or a kind of clear organizational pattern, but they probably were just day by day
Yeah.
appointments.
This is a picture we're going to end with. This was such an important picture for us to find. We did not know who R.J. Arnold was. We did not know his name. One of the amazing volunteers at the Historical Society had found a picture in a book called Portraits of Children on the Central Coast, and she was cleaning the negative for that image. And so she made a connection, but we still, we weren't certain where he was from. We didn't have any other information. So we made that connection, and then we found this negative. And this is such a wonderful moment because it has all of this damage, much of it insects, much of it moisture, and the damage has climbed all the way up to the negative, and then it stopped right at the sign of R.J. Arnold's studio, and it says, Arnold Photographer. And that was really what we needed to be able to really confirm. So we had the picture in the book, and then we had his own negative of his studio. And you can see the kind of skylight above on the left.
It's so great to have been spend some time behind the scenes as we just did, and
Yeah.
now to get at least a sense of the kind of street level view of Main Street in
Yeah.
San Luis Obispo.
On Monterey
during those
Street.
years that he would have been there. So I think that brings us to a close. It's been really a treat to discover and look at these pictures with you, Anthony.
Thank you so
And
much.
for people who have joined us, I hope you might discover some cabinet cards in your own holdings and maybe even negatives. And do know that the great historical societies of this country and other museums and collections are, interested and are
Yeah.
great resources, and we continue to delve deeper into these pictures and put together other pieces of the puzzle.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
If there are more of these pictures at the El Paso de Robles Historic Society in Paso Robles, if you want to see them, and thank you so much for listening.
Good night.